Welcome back to another episode of the Loca Fit Show, where we redefine what healthy means to you. I'm your host, Laurin, and this week's mini podcast is going to be on false hope syndrome. So I'd actually never heard of this term until I was going through some of the behavior change literature recently for a project, and I just thought it really encapsulated what a lot of clients go through, and I wanted to touch on it. So if you guys are OG YouTube listeners, you know about Science Simplified, which was basically a series where I would take research papers and break them down in layman's terms and pull out what was applicable. This is a little bit different. So it's not a traditional study where there is a intervention and then we're going to go through the results, and it's not even a meta-analysis. I'm not really sure exactly what to term this. It's just a few pages long. They do cite other research, and these researchers, Pallavi and Herman, they do a ton of great work in the eating behaviors and behavior change literature. So it's kind of, I don't want to call it just an opinion paper because it's more than that, but it's definitely a little bit different than normal. So if you guys are interested, you can read it. It's literally just a few pages. And there's some really great points they make. There are some things that I disagree with in terms of how they phrase it, but we'll get to that. So I wanted to read a few things for you guys because it was just said so perfectly. Self-change is often perceived as unrealistically easy to achieve in an unreasonably short amount of time. Key part there. Moreover, embarking on self-change attempts induces feeling of control and optimism that supersedes the lessons of prior experiences. And that is a really important point that I want to touch on next. Finally, people tend to expect an unrealistically high payoff from successful self-change. So the part about referring to prior experiences is absolutely critical. This paper is touching a lot on weight control and dieting, so we'll touch on that, but we could use this in any sense, right? Prior experience and learning from that is going to be absolutely critical to making any kind of change. So let's touch on diet, for example, because that's what we're talking about in this paper and what we talk about with most of our clients. You've tried X amount of diets in the past, certain protocols or certain plans or programs or whatever it might be, right? When those things have not gone as you've wanted, not gone as planned, what did work? What didn't work? Where do we need to make changes? All of these things are incredibly important for us to move forward effectively. The whole point of having experiences in life, again, diet or otherwise, is so that we can learn from them and truly integrate them into the next thing that we're doing. So when we're talking about behavior change, especially in the context of dieting, we must look at prior experiences and not just say, oh, that didn't work because of this and that. Maybe, but more than likely, it's going to be a pattern that is going to repeat itself unless we address it and make the appropriate changes. So this paper and a lot of papers in the food psychology and eating behaviors and even the weight regain literature can sometimes paint this very bleak picture, in my opinion, of behavior change in general. And I understand they're trying to the whole point of this paper, right, is to touch on setting realistic goals versus unrealistic goals. However, I don't think that we have to say that all behavior change is basically set up to fail, because just simply thinking that is going to set you up to fail. So having incredibly unrealistic goals is not going to serve you, but it also doesn't mean that we can't do anything about this. And it certainly doesn't mean that we can't change our body, our physique, our health, anything of that sort. So false hope syndrome specifically is talking about this phenomenon where we start a behavior change with these high hopes and expectations of success, but then our unrealistic expectations are not met, and that's when people are very frustrated. They want to give up, they become despondent, and they don't even want to continue with change. And that is when the hope of the behavior change then is slashed into this false hope. And that's what they're calling false hope syndrome. And a lot of this is going to stem back to these expectations. Another thing they talked about in here, overinflated expectations are likely the root of this, right? Overinflated expectations, this overconfidence that things are going to change super quickly. And it's not just things are going to change, it's the amount of change that can be achieved, it's the speed of change at which it can be accomplished, and it's also the ease of accomplishing said change. So these are all things that we need to be prepared for. And again, this is not being negative in any way. This is just saying, hey, we need a healthy dose of realism here, right? We can make changes, but we need to be realistic as far as the timeline, how quickly, and really how much we can do in one go, right? So let's say somebody has a goal of losing 30 pounds. We could maybe do that in one fail swoop, right? There are instances where this could happen. And could this happen rather quickly? Possibly. But we know that the faster that somebody is going to lose body fat, typically the faster they're also going to lose muscle, the more adaptations are going to accumulate, and the more negative behaviors that they're probably going to display afterwards. So that would be a really great example of setting the right expectation. Yes, 30-pound fat loss is the goal. The expectation, though, has to change that timeline. It might not happen in just a few months. And if it did happen in a few months, you're probably setting yourself up to be in a worse situation. So that's where I really kind of want to change that, like, I don't know, the whole direction of this paper. If you guys do end up reading it, like I said, it can be a little negative. And they didn't really, and the point of this paper was not to have all the answers, right? But they didn't even really say kind of like what we can do about it besides like be more realistic. And I recognize that that is useful, but we have to be realistic in a sense of how do we define what that is for each person. And that's going to be something that happens on a case-by-case, client-by-client basis to determine what is a realistic goal. And this doesn't mean that you can't push yourself, right? I think that sometimes when we hear that, we think, okay, well then I'll just take it really easy. And it's like, no, that's not the point either, right? We still have to challenge ourselves and push ourselves outside of the norm, but within a time frame and within a speed and rate that makes sense. And also, I really liked how they touched on the ease of accomplishing, right? A lot of people are going to just think that it's going to be so easy this time around because of this and that, or because last time this was happening so I couldn't do this, or because we need to learn from those prior experiences, because if it happened one time, it is probably going to happen again. And outside of some outside of a very challenging situation, I'm not going to try to say that other word, cataclysmic. Outside of that, if that was happening in your life and things were just like totally on fire, yes, maybe this time will be different, but most likely you've taken a lot of the behaviors and you're going to overlay them no matter what the goal is this time. So short podcast today. I just thought this was an interesting term, and I thought it really highlighted the importance of, again, setting those realistic expectations and also really hammering home the point of learning from prior experiences. Thank you guys so much for listening to this week's podcast. If you enjoyed it, please share. That is the best way that you can support our show. You can visit teamlocofit.com for all information about coaching services, and be sure to join our email list so you'll be the first to hear about the app that we're releasing in the next few months. Thank you guys once again, and we'll talk to you later this week.